So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Senate Education. It is Friday, April 2nd at 1:25. We are going to start the day by talking with Tom Cheney, the Executive Director of Advanced Vermont. He's going to come in and share some words about the kind of work that they do. We're then going to have an update from and some draft legislation from Mike O'Grady, Ledge Counsel, and David Englander on lead, radon, and PCBs in school. We'll then, as those of you who have been following the floor discussions, we will be taking up a proposal on S100 around financing. I've then asked the Agency of Education to give us an update on standardized testing this year. And then we're going to, in the era of COVID, and then we'll hear from Jeff Fannin. I've asked him to talk to us a little bit about the potential teacher shortage that the state is maybe facing. So we might go a little bit out of order depending on witness availability, but let's start with Tom. Great to see you.
Great to see you as well.
And I apologize for how long it's taken us to have you into committee. Senators should know Tom has worked hard to get in here, and I think we've been just a little busier than expected. So I apologize for you jumping off our radar, but glad you're back on it. The floor is yours, and we have about 30 minutes.
Great, awesome. Well, thank you. Jeannie, is it possible for you to allow me to share my screen?
Tom, do we have your documents? We tend to work just with iPads, if that's okay.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So yeah, I will just walk through it this way then. And I will do my best to be able to see you while I do it as well, but that may be easier said than done. So let me just get it here in front of me. So for starters, for the record, I'm Tom Cheney, the Executive Director of Advanced Vermont, and thank you for having me in today. And no worries for coming in a little bit later in the session. It's just a pleasure to be here. So the goals of the discussion today are to go over the state attainment goal in the state and the work that Advanced Vermont does. Talk through some considerations for workforce policy, give you a little introduction to two big projects we're working on that I think are very relevant to this committee and to its work. Policy, go over some policy priorities and our appropriations requests.
Tom, just so you know, I don't, there's only one returning member to this committee, so I don't know if anybody knows anything about Advanced Vermont either. So great.
So that's coming right up. So I will give you the deep introduction, and also I'm not sure I've been in front of this committee, perhaps at all since I've been with Advanced Vermont. We've been to your neighbors to the General and Economic Development Committee, but I'm not sure that I've made it to this one. I was hopeful to last year, but things changed. So I want to start really by stating that for the benefit, particularly those that are new to the committee, to your point, that Vermont is one of approximately 45 states that has set a post-secondary attainment goal. And it's very simply that 70% of working age Vermonters will hold a credential of value by 2025. So it was initially set by a group of leaders from education, business, government, nonprofits, philanthropy, and it was adopted formally by the legislature in 2019. And it serves as a really important stake in the ground to inform the development of policy and appropriations priorities in the legislature, but also really helps unite those sectors I just mentioned towards a shared vision to achieving this goal. And really today, in the midst of a global pandemic, to me, I think, and to many people working in this space, the goal just couldn't feel more urgent. And please do interrupt me, and I actually cannot see you, so just jump right in. So just to ground us a little bit further, what is a credential of value? Through my testimony, when I say credential, it'll really mean more of an umbrella term to encompass the many forms of education and training that result in really in a piece of paper. So certificate, degree, industry recognized credential, occupational license, registered apprenticeship. And it's a means of verifying skills and competencies and has value in the labor market, and it's stackable and transferable. And the Act 80 actually created a subcommittee of the State Workforce Development Board that I sit on that is working to formally define what a credential value is for Vermont. But those are the general features. And the great thing about it is that it doesn't just prioritize one form of education or training over another. And we're not saying degree and non-degree with kind of a negative descriptor there. We're talking about credential of value, something that really is inclusive. So with the legislation that passed the state attainment goal, it identified 4 key policy priorities that the state should focus on in order to meet the state attainment goal. And so one is promote the awareness of career pathways and the value of education and training after high school, expand access, of course, increase completion, and then maximize partnerships across and within sectors to achieve our state workforce and education goals. So Advance Vermont is really working to drive progress towards the goal. And that's why we were created. So we're a statewide organization. We're driving action among business, education, government, nonprofit, philanthropy, with a focus on increasing educational attainment. And we really try to think about it as not just an education issue, but as an issue vital to the strength of our individuals, our economy, and our communities. And really, it's not just about increasing that attainment data point, but about increasing equity and really strengthening those connections between education and training and employment. So a little more housekeeping. VSAC is our fiscal agent and provides our operational support. It also has been a seed funder of our effort. And as has long been the plan, it is phasing out its investment this year, but will continue to provide the backbone support and be a core partner. So we have a growing list of engaged organizations. We work with in various capacities with many, many different partners. And this is an incomplete list, but really gives you a sense of the range of organizations we collaborate with. So not exhaustive, but I think gives a flavor of the variety of different groups we work with in really in different ways. So probably actually, I'm going to do this first. So our work, we focus on changing the narrative. So building awareness of the importance of education and training after high school, and really the diversity of those pathways that we have. Advocate, so you're looking at it right now, both on the policy side and then on the programming or institutional side as well. Just make sure that all the core stakeholders understand that they have a role in increasing attainment in the state. And often policy change, whether it's institutional policy or state or local or federal policy, makes a big difference. We bring people together through our convening work, whether it's through conferences, information sharing, et cetera, but really trying to drive everybody in the same direction. And finally, we measure. So we track progress towards the goal. We identify where equity-related gaps exist, and we share state and national data and research that we have done ourselves. We have a data dashboard that does kind of go over this, I think it's 26 or 27 key indicators of post-secondary attainment in the state. And it really was built for you, for legislators and other key organizational leaders to have a really good understanding and a foundation in what are those levers that we have to pull to increase attainment in the state. So how are we doing with attainment? We're at 52.6% in 2019, which is the latest data available. And that puts us about 60,000 Vermonters short of our 70 by 2025 goal. So, we've made progress over the years, but we're just not on track to make up the difference without intervention and investment between now and 2025 and really beyond. And nationally, we are just above the national average of 51.9% attainment. We generally have more bachelor's and graduate degrees and fewer short-term credentials. And short-term credentials, as we'll talk about more, really are where a lot of the attention and interest from prospective students is trending at the moment. And so there's some opportunity segments we have that we could help kind of make up that 60,000 gap pretty quickly. Obviously, you get right to 60,000 if you had all working age Vermonters who had some college experience finish with some sort of credential program. But there are also other opportunities, particularly, with our high school graduating class, there's about, it's a little less than half, it's about 40% that don't actually continue on to education and training after high school. We have a 47,000 or so Vermonters who are 18 to 24. They may be enrolled right now in a program, but haven't finished. So key is getting them across the finish line, and those enrolled who haven't been. So want to talk through some key policy considerations, and this is where there gets to be some stats. And so I'll kind of go through them quickly, knowing we don't have a tremendous amount of time. But first, the economy really depends on a skilled workforce. Even before the pandemic, demand for a skilled workforce outpaced the talent available. All the high pay, high demand jobs in the state require education and training after high school. 2 in 3 employers say they have a hard time hiring for positions. And then if the Great Recession's any indication, and experts think it will be, the jobs created following the pandemic will likely go to those with education and training after high school. And so you see here in this stat that 99% of those jobs created after the Great Recession went to that group of people. So communities depend on a skilled workforce. Individuals, families, and communities that thrive with increased education and training. And educational attainment, of course, is one of the most effective ways to address racial, gender, and economic inequities. So identifying and eliminating those systemic barriers to equitable education and training it's really a moral and economic imperative. So demand is high and barriers are higher. Vermonters see the value in education and training after high school. Almost 90% in that stat there say that they think it's valuable. And 63% of those say they actually would like to pursue a credential after high school. Yet they struggle to justify the cost. The value number goes down significantly when you start to ask, is it worth the cost? It's about 34%. So during the pandemic, a third of Americans whose job has been impacted believe that they need more education and training in order to find a comparable job. So there's a real demand right now and a real understanding that they may need more education and training after high school. So we have to meet that demand. We have to be there both as a government and as institutions to be ready to fill that need. But less than half say they actually have access to that training. So that's really where we all come in. So, as I noted a moment ago, inequities underlie the barriers to education and training for Vermonters, and affordability is really chief among them. So, without financial aid, it would take nearly all of a family's income to send one person to college. And then those who are first in the family to pursue education and training after high school often struggle to complete. Same with low-income students and boys in particular, with that stat of 16% of Vermont's class 2012, first-generation boys obtained a degree within 4 years. There are inequities among people of color, and of course, broadband's a huge issue, and obviously more important than ever. So students struggle and juggle, I should say, they struggle and juggle responsibilities like never before. And so we really believe as an organization that if we better understand who our students are, we can better craft policy to serve them. So we actually conducted a poll in fall of 2019, so before the pandemic, to get a sense of what our student population looks like. Spoiler, it's not students who are full-time college students spending a lot of time on the quad. They're older, they work, they're parents, and they access education in different and new ways. So we found that even prior to COVID, they're really juggling work and financial and family responsibilities like we've never seen before. So these stats are pretty powerful.
Champion?
Yeah, Senator.
Tom, this is all post-secondary, or what when you say students, what do you mean on this?
Yeah, yes. It's people who are pursuing post-secondary credentials, whether it's a degree or a certificate or anything like that. So we looked back, in order to get a statistically significant sample, we had to look back a few years. So with people who'd been enrolled at some point, some had completed, some hadn't, and that was how we kind of got that demographic look. Yeah, great question. Thanks for making me clarify there.
Senator Hooker.
Thank you. And Tom, how do these How do the career technical centers connect or intersect with these as far as the credentials that are available coming out of those institutions?
Yeah, great question. So they very much are a key and central component to making sure that we increase attainment in the state. So they almost, I think it's probably every program in a CTE center, certainly almost every, offers some sort of credential, and often multiple credentials. So some of these credentials are like a CPR, certification. Others are, you can go and work on automobiles. So there's different levels, and the AOE works within Perkins law to actually have two tiers of credentials, a tier 1 and a tier 2. So tier 2 are probably those that most closely align with this attainment number. So a CPR certification, as an example, wouldn't count most likely, but which I think is maybe an obvious example, but something like a diesel mechanic certification probably would.
Okay, and as far as apprenticeships,
Mhm.
are they counted towards the attainment goal?
Absolutely. Yep,
Okay.
100%.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Great questions. So I'm on the second slide. It's probably slide 18 or so. But this says, students juggle responsibilities like never before. And so 1 in 3 are hungry and struggling to find housing. Nearly half are first in their family to pursue a credential without the support of an experienced family member to help them navigate. More than half are stuck paying their own bill. And then large percentages of our student population are actually new Americans and veterans. We've got 13% are new Americans and about 10% are veterans. So the bottom line is we've got to meet students where they are. And so the other kind of key thing and policy consideration is that students are looking for career connections. The more and more that they see career connections, the more meaningful it is for them. And so you can see that in one of the slides here, or one of the graphs in the slide that I have, that they really report that if a student has received support from their institution to help them connect their education with their career, then they'll say it was worth the cost. A pretty powerful stat. And then, what students are looking for in their credentials, that they're looking for those that are relevant to work, they're accessible and streamlined, they have a strong value for the cost, and are stackable. So that means that there are clear credential pathways, perhaps starting with a certificate and ending up with a degree. Stackability is something that is really important, and not just a buzzword. It is really something that's starting to become a reality for a lot of people. Vermonters need navigation help is another key policy consideration. So 9 in 10 Vermonters see the value of post-high school education training, like we said a few slides ago. But with so many resources to identify and evaluate and access, kind of all this relevant information that can help them in their career and education path, it's just costly, time confusing. So particularly those who are historically marginalized from those backgrounds, they have the most trouble really accessing these resources and the supports needed to get into education and training after high school and then ultimately to complete it. So a national survey indicates that less than a third of Americans say that they understand career pathways and potential education programs well. And as I mentioned before, they're really looking for short-term credentials. We've got 1 million unique credentials nationwide and about 2,000 in Vermont. Vermonters really need help navigating their options. So we also, in the survey that provided this other data that we just went over, we asked, do they see a need for resources to support them? Do Vermonters see a need for a resource to support them to pursue their education and career journeys? And 91% said that an online hub doing that would be valuable for them. So the next slide is, we answered the call. We have a new tool for students. It's called My Future VT. It's myfuturevt.org. And it's a free one-stop online resource providing Vermonters with the information they need to make informed and empowered decisions about their career and education paths. It's built for job seekers, prospective students, and then the navigators, those people who work with them. So the voc rehab counselor, the Vermont Department of Labor counselor, VSAC, school counselors, you name it. We built this resource for them as well, so they can use it with their students and those that they work with. So this is launching in April. It's live now in beta form. We still have some things we're adding to it. We're still user testing. It'll look a little flashier in about a month, but we're going to go live and do a big public relations campaign to try to get it in the hands of as many Vermonters as we possibly can. And we just think it's so essential that we have this resource out right now, given all of the challenges we have with COVID and the workforce recovery that we're no doubt going to need to focus on. So that is a huge project that Advanced Vermont has undertaken. And if you go to the next slide, you can see a screenshot of the homepage. And really, we have three core components: exploring careers, finding education and training programs, and getting support. So we actually take the Vermont Department of Labor and McClure brochure that I think you've probably seen or heard from. I know you've heard from McClure. And we've put it online. So you can actually interactively explore the 66 high pay, high demand jobs in the state and get a sense of what those jobs look like. And then, and this is, I think, never been done, we've actually connected all of those jobs to the programs in the state that align with them. So we're still building out those programs, but we have contacted every post-secondary institution in the state and worked with many of them already and more to come to get their programs that align with the high pay, high demand jobs on our site. So you can click on a program that you really care about a career you care about or interested in, and then you see the programs in the state that help you get the education and training you need to access that job. As we go on, we're going to actually expand to include all the plan is to include all post-secondary education and training programs, regardless of whether they connect to the high pay, high demand careers or not, but that's where we've started. But it's a big undertaking. So then the third section, after kind of, having a database of careers, a database of education and training programs, and related information that support both of those topics, many other pages and resources from how do you, give me some advice about a job search, where are the jobs in Vermont? We have links to job boards. How do I write a cover letter or a resume? What are those things? To how do I pay for education and training after high school? What are the different types? Tell me what a credential is. I've never heard that word before. What is that? And what's the difference between a certificate and an apprenticeship or a degree, an associate degree or a bachelor's degree? So those are those two sections. The third section is getting support. So we know that an online resource is a great starting point, or maybe it's a supplement to some conversations people have had with a mentor or a school counselor. But we have to make sure we're connecting them to real life supports, whether it's a human being who can help them along, or whether it's a particular program, a support program that can help them. So we want to really make sure we're doing that. So we have a whole nother database of all of the resources that we have been able to inventory that will help job seekers and prospective students along their journeys. And we add to those every day. And we'll be continuing to add to those, I think, every day. And you can sort them by identity. So you say, I'm BIPOC, or I am LGBTQ, or I'm young, or I'm older, I'm a high school student, or I'm an adult, or I'm a parent. And so you can actually search through and get the resources that are relevant to you. Again, this hasn't, to our knowledge, been done anywhere before. So that's all on My Future VT. I have just a few more slides, but curious if there's any questions about that resource.
Question. First of all, great job. I think this is really interesting, very important, and appreciate your work on it. Senator Hooker.
I'm impressed with it as well, but my question is, what kind of system, IT type system do you have? Is this going to be connected with DOL that has, many issues with IT? Are they going to be able to handle this? Is there a need to upgrade? I mean, we already know there's a need to upgrade IT there, but, is this going to be able to go live by the end of this month and not run into problems that we're seeing already with the IT system that exists?
Yeah, so great question. Two things. One, it's live now. We're just making it better before we really push it far and wide. So there's a few little things that we're working out, but you can access all of the information right now. And what we're doing is we're getting user feedback. So people who are our target user, key stakeholders, those navigators are telling us, this is where you nailed it. This is where you need a little finessing, and our developers are continuing to kind of put some bells and whistles on it. But it's ready. It's ready and live, and 100% better than what we had because we didn't have this before. So we feel really confident about where it is now. So we're not anticipating any glitches there because, like I said, it's already pushed live. In terms of connecting it with VDOL, so there is this broader conversation that the Vermont Department of Labor is looking at, and I think they've had appropriations ask that I think was supported in the House, that you may be familiar with, that was around building out additional IT supports for their workforce development division. So I think it was case management, and then also some reporting mechanisms for their federal reports and elsewhere, but also they wanted some public facing tools. And so we are and will continue to work with them to make sure that we are connected where possible and not duplicating efforts, and really staying coordinated. So their project's very much on the early phases. Ours is ready to rock and help Vermonters right now. So we're going to work very closely with them to make sure we integrate where it's necessary, and don't duplicate as they build theirs out and decide what's important for them to include and what their vendor can provide.
And,
Is that
and
helpful?
prior, yes, it is. And prior to your big opening, how's the traffic been?
Well, it's been pretty good. I don't have super relevant or like recent data for you, but we've had pretty good traffic of the folks that we put it in front of, and we had really good feedback and really good insights. So it's been well received. And ask me again in about a month and a half, and I'll have some firm numbers for you. Yeah.
Okay.
Senator Lyons.
So this is just awesome. I wish that you had been around when I was advising hundreds of students. But
I wish I was working with you then too.
yeah, it would have been fun. I know. So Tom, this is so awesome what you're doing. I'm totally impressed with it, and the work that you're doing with the Vermont Department of Labor. And are you? I have a lot of questions, and I'll try and keep it short. But are you working extended out into with the contractors? Like Weber, and DOL sort of contracts out with different folks, and are you linking in with them as well, or or is that part of the future plans?
Well, I think both. Yeah, the
Okay.
answer is we try, in terms of our resources in particular, our resource section wants to connect people to all of those entities. So Weber, Voc Rehab, all of
Yeah.
these different entities.
Yeah.
The job centers, I believe they're called, out of VDOL. So that, as I say, what I would say is our key linkage point right now is making sure that we're connecting people to those tools and those resources. And we want to, continue to strengthen relationships with those organizations to find not just, are we directing people to the right place, but can we have some joint initiatives as well, to kind of further my future VT and this work more broadly.
So then my other question is this, it's something that I've been thinking about quite a bit, and it's kind of serendipitous. Here you are, that a number of these folks who might even work for VDOL, or they might work with a contractor or with DCF, and they're interested in continuing their education to master's level, let's say. And
Yep.
what we need more than anything right now are some masters in social work focusing on mental health.
Yeah.
So they're all flowing together. And these folks are required to take continuing ed credits.
Yep.
So they may have a high school degree or they may have a bachelor's degree, but they're taking CEUs. And you're the link. It seems like you're a neat place to begin a dialogue with our state college system, and especially in a time of Zoom, to put together some I mean, I've done a lot of work in the experiential learning area and understand that these CEUs could definitely be used to demonstrate if it, their ability in
Yeah.
for a bachelor's degree or for a master's degree. So have you thought about the CEU bit at all? Because if you haven't, I'm going to put a bill in because I think this is so important for people who are maybe, I was talking with someone the other day actually who is doing the workforce development for high school kids and trying to move them into the workforce. And she takes CEUs and she wants to get a master's degree. So here she's helping kids. She's taking her little coursework, and wouldn't it be neat if that could help her get a step up too? So have you been thinking at all about that? I just see so many connections here. It's just amazing.
Yeah, and I think that it's a really important point. And what we want to be able to do with this resource is to eventually, kind of check all those boxes. Right now, we have a more narrow focus towards kind of more of that first credential that
Yeah.
somebody might have. So we can, and kind of to try to advance this goal. But yeah, I mean, it's 100%. We need to be focused on all of the different training opportunities that we have. Thinking about how can you, get experience for your prior learning is really valuable. And what we hope is exactly what I think is happening right here, Senator Lyons, is that this tool isn't just a wonderful tool for students and job seekers, but it's also a tool to advance the conversation. So
Yeah, you're right. You've done that. You've absolutely done that. You're doing you're doing great work.
And if I might, it might make sense really briefly, one of the, and this is in the slides as well, we launched, as we were saying, we want to inventory all of the credential programs in the state. Realize nobody's done that. The state hasn't done that. Nobody has done that, right? And so we said, well, how are we going to do this? And we plugged into a national effort that's helped us quite a bit. And really, the thought is that if we have all credential information, not just in Vermont, but across the country together in a readable, in a kind of like an open data format that all kind of speaks together, apples to apples, we can actually create really cool comparison tools. We can really create really great things, information resources for students and career seekers, but also, and this gets to your point, Senator Lyons, for policymakers, for employers, and for institutions. So with what we're doing just on our micro level in Vermont, when we have all of the post-secondary credentials inventoried in the state, we'll be able to tell you as a policymaker, here are the credentials that are offered in this area. So health, as an example, health services. And you can look at it and say, well, does that track the need? And maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. So there's a lot of questions that you can ask as a policymaker or answers that I think you can get from this data. And we're at a place where we've started the work and we need help to finish it.
Yeah, I can hear that. And obviously, many of our institutions of higher learning have done some equation between experiential learning and college credit. So it's not like there's gonna have to be a reinvention of the wheel. It will be a matter of your getting them to help you catalog that and to put it into your system. Kind of great, neat.
Any other questions? We're going to have to probably leave it there, Tom, given that Ledge Council is back and forth and their time is tight and we have Michael Grady coming. But do you have a final word for us?
I'll leave the final word with an ask. So the work that we're doing with My Future VT, with this work to credential all the programs in the state, we call the Vermont Credential Transparency Project. Both are active, both are making great progress, both are helping Vermonters today. But to make them stronger and better, particularly in COVID, we're asking for a state appropriation of $350,000 for this year. So happy to talk with the committee or with any one of you more about that ask, but certainly be hopeful that to the degree that you're having any conversations or influence with the appropriations committee, that you will we'll talk about this as something that might be a priority.
Yeah, I think we are working pretty closely with Approach. So if you would put that in writing, that would be great. Share it with our committee assistant, who'll share it with us, and then we will we'll have to have you back for maybe 15 or 20 minutes on that ask at some point. Great, thank you.
Perfect. It's I think my second to last slide in the deck, and I'm happy to pull something further together.
Terrific. Oh, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
We are now moving on to look at lead, radon, and PCBs in schools. This is a topic that I know early on in the session was raised, and time and issues took over. I've spoken with Senator Lyons a little bit about this, who is, as you know, the chair of Health and Welfare. This has a lot of overlap with her committee. And so while we're looking at the school construction bill, H426, it seemed like a good time to get an update on those items from the Department of Health, and also have a look at some language that was shared by the administration as it relates to PCBs, just to get this conversation going a little bit. And that's why Mike O'Grady is here. I don't know if this is something that would end up being worked on in here or with Senator Lyons. I think we can talk about that, but that is the outline of what we're doing. Any questions before I have Mike O'Grady jump in? Okay, Mr. O'Grady.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Senator Campion, do you want me to walk through the language?
Did you already email it to Jeannie?
I don't believe I emailed it to you. I did not email it to Jeannie. I will email it to Jeannie now.
No, that's fine. Why don't you, we'll put it up on the screen if Jeannie would give you access to that, and we'll have you take us through the language and give us a little bit of an understanding of what it does.
Okay, great.
Great, thank you.
Okay, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Hello? Okay.
Yep.
So this is currently a draft bill. Generally, what it would do is require all schools constructed or renovated before 1980 to conduct screening of indoor air quality for PCBs, and that would need to be conducted, completed on or before August 1, 2026. And a school that did, in screening, detect actionable levels of PCBs would then need to consult with the state Vermont Department of Health regarding what would be the appropriate response. So that's generally what would happen. Let's go through the sections of the bill. Section 1, this is an amendment to the Environmental Contingency Fund. Environmental Contingency Fund is a special fund that has monies in it that are used for environmental emergencies, and the way that emergencies are generally characterized, it's as a release. And this amendment would add to the definition of release, effectively adding to what the monies in the Environmental Contingency Fund could be used for. And it would be for intentional or unintentional action or omission resulting in the spilling, leaking, emission, or disposal of PCBs from building materials in a building or structure. So if there was, as with Burlington High School, a determination that there was a spilling, leaking, emission, or disposal of PCBs from the building, the Environmental Contingency Fund could be used to provide monies to respond. Similarly, in Section 2, this is an amendment to the definition section for, well, it's the solid waste chapter, but the definition of release relates to hazardous materials releases. Hazardous materials releases are something that the state has significant authority to respond to and remediate, and then seek contribution or payment from the person who caused the release. So what this is doing, as with the environmental contingency fund definition of release, is including the release of PCBs from building materials in a building or structure as a release that the state can respond to under its hazardous materials release authority. And then in section 3, this is session law. So this is not being put into statute. And this is going to basically say what the corrective action and procedures are going to be for screening of schools. And the first thing that's done in subsection A is provide that, except as otherwise provided, the investigation of PCBs under this section are going to be subject to DEC's investigation and remediation of contaminated properties rule. It's basically a rule that the state has for when to or how to screen for hazardous materials and how to respond to them when they are found. The second subsection, the screening level investigation, says on or before August 1, 2026, all schools, so it's all schools, it's not just public schools or school districts or independents, it's all schools that were constructed or renovated before 1980 shall conduct a screening level investigation of indoor air in their school districts, supervisory unions, and independent schools of school buildings for PCBs according to guidelines adopted by the Department of Environmental Conservation in consultation with the Department of Health. And then you'll see in sub C, a school that has a sampling result that is at or exceeds the 15 nanograms per cubic meter screening level shall conduct a site investigation in accordance with DEC's investigation and remediation of contaminated properties rule to determine whether the source of PCB contamination is where the source of PCB contamination is located. And then the site investigation report shall identify the location of the school that is the source area, the use of the location, the number of students, and they're basically the length of time that they're present in the location where there is that source of PCBs. And that's important because based on the site investigation report, Department of Health shall provide the school with guidance on the potential health effects. And the guidance provided by the department shall be used to evaluate cleanup alternatives and be used by DEC to determine whether the school has met the requirements for site closure under that investigation and remediation rule, or whether or not that the site can still continue to be used subject to conditions on its operation. And then the PCBs in schools, there will be a guidance document to be used by DEC when overseeing the investigation and cleanup. In addition, in section 4, the administration is looking for 2 positions to implement and oversee the PCB screening of schools. One would be DEC and one would be at the Department of Health. And the entire act would take effect on passage. What you don't see here, I will note, is money. What this would cost, who would pay, what are the costs or of any, what state costs would be paid if there was a determination that PCBs were present. That's the big omission in this language from my perspective. There's no language addressing the cost to the state or to the school or to the town, etc. So that's the bill.
Okay. If you don't mind taking it off screen, and I think we'll take a few questions. Senator Lyons, please.
Okay. Oh, so yeah, knowing how costly this might be, the money is probably, we should probably look for some money, but the question I have is related to the ARPA funds. Everybody's going after ARPA funds and the potential for infrastructure funds or capital funds going forward. And so I'm asking Michael if you have any thoughts about whether or not there might be monies available for the work that's in the bill, or possibly for the school. I mean, we've been talking about school capital construction the other day, but if you have any sense of what might be incoming federal dollars, whether ARPA or next.
My knowledge of ARPA is really focused on the state recovery funds, which have 4 categories of approved use. And Vermont is receiving $1 billion, or just over $1,053,000,000 dollars from that. 3 of the categories have to be in response in some way to COVID and the need to pay for things in response to COVID. And I wouldn't say that this is in response to COVID. The 4th category is to pay for water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. And there's no requirement for COVID response there. But I don't think this falls within water, sewer, or broadband. There's also money in ARPA for school construction and generally for something called infrastructure. I am not as versed on that and what it can be used for as others. I can talk to JFO about that if you would like.
Yeah, I mean, it might be helpful, without, getting too far afield, but the other question is what potentially is coming with the infrastructure bill that continues to be debated. So,
Sure.
because I'm trying to understand how we may be able to get 1 or 2 positions out of this, but that's an ongoing expenditure. But once all the testing and planning is done, it's a huge expense that, not that we don't want to do it. I'm not saying
Right.
that.
The House Appropriations Bill does have $5 million of money in it to do the testing. There's $10 million that's transferred to the Environmental Contingency Fund, and of that, $5 million is to be used for the PCB testing. But that's for testing. It doesn't say response. It doesn't say remediation. It doesn't say closure, because the bill recognizes that there might be closure. So I just wanted to put that in front of you as something you either address now or probably in a year or 2, since screening will be going on until 26.
Yeah, and my thoughts on this, and I think this might warrant a conversation with Senator Lyons and the Pro Tem, and just see if what the and Senator Kitchell, what the path forward might be, if and when we want to do it, and when it makes the most sense. I'll also request a fiscal note. If you want to, you don't need to write to joint fiscal if you don't want to, Mr. O'Grady. I can ask them about the ARPA funds as well.
Sure. Okay.
Fiscal note. Any other immediate questions for Mr. O'Grady? Senator Perchlik.
I guess it's a question for you, and maybe I missed this. Are you thinking of this as an amendment to 426? Or like a committee bill? Or
yeah, no, to be honest, I don't know. What I'm afraid of is that there are, as I think a lot of chairs are, there's all this money out there. What sorts of things do we need? What can we access? And what do we need to be prepared to use? And so this is just something that I wanted to get out there today to all of you. I don't necessarily think I don't think we'd have time to do it as an amendment, I don't think, to H26, 426. I think this is going to take a combination of, I think, and maybe Senator Lyons would disagree, but I think we need health and welfare involved in these kinds of conversations as well. And certainly appropriations. And there's reference to DCF, so that means bringing natural in, possibly. So is that helpful, Senator Perchlik?
Yeah.
DEC.
Yes, thank you. What did I say?
DCF, but that brings us in, so.
All right, then. Thanks, Mr. O'Grady. Let's leave it there. And I'll reach out to Joint Fiscal and we'll be back in touch. Mr. Englander, you just heard the introduction of an idea from Mr. O'Grady, but what we're really looking for is more of a broad overview, as we said in our request, on lead and radon and PCBs in schools in general. I guess you could categorize this as school health, if you will, the buildings themselves. And if you would just bring us up to generally where things are, your concerns, etc. I think that'd be really helpful to just sort of set the table as we were digging into some of this stuff.
Wonderful. So good afternoon, committee members, Mr. Chair. My name is David, for the record, my name is David Englander. I'm the Senior Policy and Legal Advisor to the Commissioner of Health, which is still a mouthful. Mr. Chair, I think in terms, there's a significant amount of uncertainty and unknowns in these things. So I'm going to start in reverse order. So I'm going to talk about PCBs, then radon, and then water testing for lead, if that's all right with you.
Absolutely.
So in terms of PCBs, PCBs are an incredibly stable molecule. They last a long time. They're resistant to heat, so they were used for industrial purposes in hundreds of products, thousands of products up until the late 70s. The exposure to PCBs is they're a carcinogen. They have non-cancer endpoints such as disruption to the endocrine system, as well as impacts on the immune system. The issue is that they are pervasive in things like insulation and caulking in windows, which of course is used in all kinds of construction materials and therefore are affecting our schools. There is no requirement for indoor testing in Vermont, whether it be in domestic spaces, industrial spaces, commercial spaces, or education. When testing is done frequently in connection with renovations, sometimes we find things and sometimes we don't. As I might preface this by saying there's a significant amount of uncertainty about radon testing in Vermont because, PCBs. We have very, very little testing of indoor air quality for PCBs in general. And the remediation costs are even more uncertain. It might be as easy as switching out a window, and it might mean that a school needs to be, no longer used for educational purposes. One of the middle grounds, of course, is changing the regime of the HVAC system, which we'll come back to in radon. And then, of course, you can minimize exposure by only having personnel in that building or in that room for a limited period of time. We're sort of at the very beginning of trying to get our hands around PCBs in terms of exposure to air quality. I have to take your questions, although it may be the case I'll have to take your questions back to our folks to get you answers.
So on PCBs, I suspect that you were involved a little bit in the drafting of the administration's bill that we just went through.
Yes, although in consultation with us, absolutely, DEC was the primary drafter. This is something the department and DEC obviously support.
Okay. I don't see any immediate questions, so please continue.
So moving on to radon.
Senator Lyon.
I'm sorry.
I think I'll save my question for the end because it doesn't exactly relate to schools, so I'll hold that thought. That's a heads up for David Englander.
So in terms of radon, there's also uncertainty. We do have there are no requirements for indoor testing for radon in schools, but Vermont, I should start here. Radon is a radioactive gas that comes from the decay of granite. Vermont has very high levels of radon across the state. I think we have twice the number of national average of households with elevated radon. Radon testing is not required. The Department of Health does maintain a radon testing program that is at no cost to the schools. We only have one person. I'm going to pretend as though I'm not looking at notes as I pull up a document. I can get you some numbers. I have not committed all of this to memory. I beg your forgiveness. 101 schools have been tested for radon through the radon program, which is less than a quarter of all schools. And 12% of schools have had at least one room with elevated radon tests. 8 schools have installed mitigation systems. 3 have fixed their radon problem by making HVAC adjustments. And 1 school put mitigation on hold due to significant renovations that were coming. We can do between 15 and 20 tests a year. We actually have an industrial hygienist who comes in and actually does the testing. In contrast to lead testing, it's a little bit more technical collecting indoor air. There's many more factors, not just like filling up a jar and sealing it up and sending it out. The costs of radon testing are also extremely variable. It might be as easy as opening a window or changing the HVAC system regime, and it can be that you can't use the building, which is very unusual. But you might have an expensive system that essentially you create a chimney and you suck the radon out of the place of exposure, and you put it outdoors. The cost for remediation can be anywhere from free, opening up a window, changing HVAC, to actual remediation system, which can run from, very rough numbers are $10,000 to $100,000 for that sort of thing. And in fact, even in domestic spaces, it can be tens of thousands of dollars to make sure to ensure that you're taking the radon that's in your basement and you're putting it into outdoor air. Just as a point of fact, radon is present outdoors, but non-concentrations that would have health effects. It's really about the buildup of radon in a closed space and then inhaling it. We did not conduct, I should note, that we did not conduct any radon testing this year due to the department's full deployment to the COVID-19 response.
Thank you. Still not Senator Lyons.
Well, no, I was just going to say PCB does affect the immune system. So in that sense, it makes one more susceptible to the infection of COVID infection. So therefore, we could link it.
Great.
I probably would be turned down, but it seems to me that this would perhaps make our children and teachers more susceptible to infection. I don't know whether if that would pass muster at the federal level for the use of any funds. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, Mr. Englander, lead.
So lead. There's been a lot of turnover in the committee, so I don't know how far back you want to go. I do have a memo that I'll send to the committee by the end of the day. I want it to be responsive to your questions, though. The Department of Health and DEC conducted a water testing for lead pilot program in 2017 to determine whether or not there was exposure to lead by virtue of students, staff, and teachers drinking lead, and there was a sufficient number of elevated lead in drinking water that the Department of Health joined with DEC and others to support the bill that became Act 66 of 2019, which requires that all schools and childcares across the state test every tap that is used for drinking water, food preparation, or ingestion to test for levels of lead. Money was appropriated for both getting a testing program off the ground as well as doing the testing itself. For the initial round of testing, the state decided to bear the cost. The General Assembly appropriated money for the Department of Health, not only to have the staff to do this, but also we actually did all the testing, all of the samples. So we did all of the outreach. We did, it's us, DEC, and AOE. We did all of the testing, the outreach, the training. We also arranged for the shipping and the pickup of samples, as well as the testing itself at the public health lab. All of the data is available at a marvelous website that was designed and maintained by the Department of Environmental Conservation. The the program was going great guns and everything was going very smoothly up until COVID. Schools and child cares had until July 1 of this year to test, and our target was going to be well ahead of that. So in March of 2020, we had tested 65% of all schools. And again, I'm going to pretend like I'm not pulling up my notes.
So roughly 70% of the schools in the state have been tested.
And have results, and those results are publicly available on our website.
Okay, and then right now things are on pause given the pandemic, and so hasn't been a date set to sort of pick up testing again.
So there is a date set.
Right.
So as of a few weeks ago, I'm sorry. So I failed to mention that the Department of Health, in conjunction with other stakeholders, came before the General Assembly last March and asked for an extension because not only were we fully deployed, not only were staff as well as the lab fully deployed to COVID, but of course, students and teachers and staff were no longer in schools, which meant testing was impossible because you have to test during the hours of regular operation.
Right.
So that was put off until December 31 of 2021. A few weeks ago, the Department of Health reached out to the remaining schools to determine whether they would be willing to continue testing, and we got responses thus far from 57 schools, and the dates for their testing have been scheduled, and I'll send you a link in my memorandum to that schedule. So that's all publicly available. So
what percentage of 35% is represented by the 57 schools?
Yes.
What percentage of?
Oh, I'm sorry. What percentage? So it's. You'll forgive me for a moment.
That's right. So I may not have been clear. So if we're looking at, roughly 35% of the schools still need to be tested, and you've got a date for 57. Any idea how many after that? Or what?
Sure. Sorry. So 61 schools remaining.
Okay. 61 schools remaining. Okay.
Oh.
Okay. All right. And then would you say a word or two about the cost for remediation with lead? Because now we have all these schools out there also that I suspect they're going to need funds.
Sure. So the cost remediation can take several forms, and you'll forgive me, Mr. Chair, if I'm giving too much information, but you can take a faucet out of service, which might the cost of which might be nothing. You can put up a sign saying, this is only for hand washing only. That's not considered remediation. You actually have to take something out of service meaningfully. Mm-hmm. To replacing a tap, which might cost $60 to the most expensive thing that has been done is taking several taps offline and installing water filtered bottle filling stations. So the lowest cost for any party, I believe, was $59.50. And the most expensive remediation was $24,000 from a large school that did a whole host of work. I'll just note for folks who are less familiar with this bill is that the remediation funds have been appropriated for essentially from the wall out. So it's really a replacement of tap faucet or drinking fountain, and that when there are costs associated with plumbing, which has been been less than 8% of schools have had to deal with. I'm sorry, I think it's 8 schools, and childcare had to deal with an actual plumbing problem. It's usually the cost. Usually the source of the lead has to do with the solder in the fixtures themselves. I should say, despite the fact that since 2012, it's federal law that all fixtures sold must be lead-free. There are many of those fixtures still available, and lead-free also doesn't mean that there's no lead in them. Ironically, there are still, it just means that they have to have a very small amount. But if you are purchasing a fixture that was sold after 2012, the fixture is very, very unlikely to be the source of the problem, and indeed hasn't been. So right now, Mr. Chair, to answer your specific question, $165,000 in remediation reimbursements have been processed. Let me correct myself. The minimum request was not $59.50, but $59.95. The maximum request was $24,000. It is estimated that 40 schools and 17 childcare have requested and received remediation reimbursement. This is a fraction of what could be reimbursed based on the reported remediation actions taken by schools. And honestly, we don't know if schools and childcare have decided to foot the bill, whether they don't have the organizational administrative capacity to request remediation, or whether they're waiting until such time as it makes sense for them, for budget or staff reasons.
Very helpful. Appreciate the overview very much. And committee questions at this point for Mr. Englander on PCBs, radon, lead. Anything else, Mr. Englander, that you believe we need to have our eye on as it relates to school health? Again, the health of the buildings. PCBs popped up, lead. Anything else that you're thinking we may end up having to work on? I mean, asbestos, for example, is something. Right. So I don't know if there's anything else that you're thinking might be out there.
No, I mean, the good thing about asbestos, I probably shouldn't say the good thing about asbestos, considering it's a carcinogen, but if it's remaining in place, if it's undisturbed, if there isn't construction or remediation, it's not going to affect you. The same thing is actually true of lead paint as well. If lead paint is in place, it's not peeling, it's not falling, you're not taking it, you're not handling it. It's safe in place. Although obviously we would like as much of it out of both, domestic residential as well as industrial and educational spaces. So to step back a little bit, certainly I shouldn't say certainly. It seems appropriate for us to have a larger discussion about how we're regulating some of these things. There are a lot of holes, as we've discussed, that there are. For instance, there is no indoor testing regime for indoor air testing for things like radon, and it's a very complicated. It's very complicated. It is that kind of testing, for instance, it takes a sophisticated actor to do it, and it can be expensive to do the testing, and of course, it can be expensive to do the remediation. So, in the months and years to come, we're going to be having a discussion about how thoughtful can we be about protecting students as well as the teachers and staff that work in schools.
Senator Lyons.
So I'm still going after how can we make a lot of this happen with limited resources, and as we're looking at the need for HVAC investments in schools as a result of the pandemic, and obviously there's been thought given to tag teaming and putting together some of the remediation for all of these things, PCBs especially. So if the testing were done on schools for maybe all of these things, could that be sort of put together with any of the HVAC remediation, that some of which is going on now? I understand that, but going forward, is that something that's been discussed or not?
That's not something that I've had discussions about.
Okay. But maybe the AOE folks have some insight into that. I don't know. Maybe Senator Perchlik has insight. I don't know to that.
Well, I feel like we do have two experts in Senator Lyons and Senator Perchlik with school building health, in all seriousness. So I think this is something that we should pull together the chair of APROPS and others to get a sense of how best to move forward, how best to prepare schools to do this work, get a sense of the funding that's going to be needed, and seeing if we have have access to it. But one final question I had is back to the asbestos. You alluded, I think, or mentioned something about other air testing. I know asbestos can be used in glues. I don't know if they're still being used in glues, that would keep a rug together, things like that. I'm just thinking of a child center that could have this in its carpets, and activity on those rugs or carpets could get it into the air. And are we testing for it in the air like that?
We're not.
You're not. Okay.
There are statutory regulatory triggers for the need for testing, but it's not done as a matter of course in the way that lead water testing for lead is now required.
Okay. Okay, Senator Perslick, please.
One kind of related school health issue is just basically the oxygen levels in these classrooms. As Mr. Englander was referring to, it's when these levels become concentrated and you start breathing it a lot is really where the problem is. And so good HVAC can address those. But just having low oxygen levels is, I don't know if I guess it's sort of a health issue, but it's also just a learning issue for schools. Studies have shown that classrooms with better ventilation, the students do better, just because they're getting the oxygen they need. Their brains are getting the oxygen they need. So I don't know if it's the same level as the other things we're talking about today, but it's something. There are ASHRAE standards for how much ventilation you should have for classrooms, but I don't know if it's something that we would put in the same category as this. It's something I'm interested in investigating as we move forward on HVAC issues in schools.
Mr. Englander, did you have anything to say in response to that in any way? No. Okay. No. Yeah, and then I would say the other, and Senator Lyons has been a leader on things along the lines of keeping toxins out of children and families and labeling and all of those things that are so important. And that's a separate conversation, but I'm also, as it relates to rugs and things, but what happens, is there air testing? Is it triggered in any way when a construction project might happen in a school? In other words, back to your point, things are fine unless they are disturbed. The wall is taken down. Who knows if there's lead, if it's being any kind of air testing, asbestos, et cetera, when those kinds of construction activities happen?
Yeah, so anytime there is construction activities that might possibly disturb asbestos and lead, there is a trigger for testing, not the air, but testing the materials themselves. And if the materials themselves test positive for lead and testing, for asbestos or lead, then certain then that becomes that remediation itself becomes regulated activity, and in order to minimize exposure.
Thank you. Any other questions? Senator Lyons?
I have a question.
Senator Chittenden.
So, Mr. Englander, thank you. My experience with asbestos, though, there's a caveat to what you just said. If it's a child care center that's in a home, if it's a private residence and they do a major upgrade to their facility, it is unclear to me whether or not that would trigger the same type of mandated state regulation if it's a home daycare center. Do you have any perspective on that aspect of asbestos treatment and remediation?
So the answer, it's a great question. I don't know off the top of my head. Certainly, rental housing it's required. I don't know whether child care center. It's just I'm not sure. I'm happy to get back to you on that.
That would be great if you would get back to and email our committee assistant and the entire committee. I'd appreciate that.
I'm happy to. I can tell you this, that even this came as a surprise to some legislators a few years ago when we worked on Senator Lyons will remember that when we worked on revamping the lead poisoning prevention chapter, and some members of the General Assembly were surprised to learn that you actually are prevented from even doing lead remediation in your home if that activity is dangerous. So if you have a floor that might have lead paint, you actually may not even sand that floor. I just don't know to what extent that triggers. Those triggers are distinct in childcare facilities.
Great. Senator Hooker, final word.
Following up on that, Mr. Englander, are those restrictions related to the presence of children in the home? Or
No,
okay.
it's simply if you are creating an exposure pathway, that practice is forbidden.
Okay.
Thank you for being with us very much. I'm sorry, Senator Lyons.
I can't resist asking Mr. Englander, Dr. Anyway, Dr.
I'm
Englander.
a doctor of laws.
Wait, yeah, you are. But probably this is going to be a more of a rhetorical question for you, because I'm wondering if the Department of Health has been sort of contacted regarding the sinking of the Adirondack.
I'm unaware that we have been, but
Okay. But I mean, for me, it's a huge concern. So it would be interesting to know what the consequences of that are.
I will also follow up with the committee on that.
Thank you.
We know you're incredibly busy. We thank you for all the incredible work you and Dr. Levine and Ms. Dolan and the entire team have and continue to do on the pandemic front, and really appreciate all your work here today. And thank you for being with us. And we'll look forward to seeing you again soon.
I look forward to it as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Committee, why don't we just stretch for just a few minutes and come back just a bit after 2:45, and we can hear from the Agency of Education.